Thanks for being a part of our study today. Tony and I have been playing with grandkids, and so she's taken the day off, and I'm with you today. We're looking at another look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Tomorrow we'll be back in the prophet Micah. In this passage, Paul could easily have quoted from the psalm writer who said, "Stop striving and know that I'm God. I'll be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted on the earth." What Paul wanted the church to stop striving was stop striving for status, stop striving for public acclaim. That was the big thing in Corinth. And he thought there was something better to strive for, obeying the Lord and living with him. Here's how he wrote: "However that may be, let each of you lead a life that the Lord has assigned, to which God has called you." This is my rule in the churches. Now, there'd be people who would take exception to that phrase, "live as you have been assigned," and rightfully so. Slavery, injustice, racial injustice, people who are in abject poverty, it would really be wrong for them to say, "Well, I guess I just need to live with my assigned life." So Paul obviously had something to say. What does he want to talk about? Well, what he wanted to talk about was stop striving, again, for status. Stop striving for the things that our selfish ambition pushes us toward, public notoriety. Stop doing that. And let's just think for a moment that sometimes status and public recognition is not always cracked up to be. Stephen Covey wrote a great book on success years ago, sold millions of copies. Covey in that book talked about someone who's climbing the ladder to success only to find that it is leaned against the wrong building. Well, Paul wants people to avoid that. Jesus did too. When Jesus told the parable of the sower, there was one area of the field that would be very similar to what was going on in Corinth. He said, "That which was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing." Well, striving to get out of oppression, striving to get out of racial injustice, striving to get out of poverty, striving to make your life better, yes. Striving for selfish ambition, striving to make more money so you can have one more possessions, and on, maybe that would be a no. Paul gave a couple of really striking examples to help people understand what he was trying to get at. One of them had to do with circumcision. Let's read what he had to say. Is anyone at the time of his call already circumcised? Let him not seek to remove the marks of circumcision. Was anyone at the time of call uncircumcised? Let him not seek circumcision. Now, circumcision for a Jew was the sign of the covenant, and it was one of the most valued things in the life of a Jewish person. We cannot emphasize enough how important it was. It would be like getting a troop of Marines together and saying to them, "Hey, don't bother about saluting the flag. It doesn't matter." In fact, just take that illustration, multiply it times 100, and you'll have an idea how important circumcision was. So was Paul saying circumcision is unimportant? No. What he was saying, though, is that circumcision is nothing, uncircumcision is nothing, get this, but obeying the commandment of God is everything. He wasn't saying do away with circumcision. He was making a point. The thing was, we must obey the Lord. That is our standard. Well, in a world where God's direction and his guidance is ignored for competing issues, Jesus wants us to know, Paul wants us to know, let's serve God. Okay? Here's another example. It has to do with slavery. And now, in the Roman Empire, about a third of the people who lived in the Roman Empire were slaves. And it's said that the Roman Empire couldn't even function without slaves. When we think of slaves, we think of the horrible oppression of American slavery, what happened in our country. But that was not all the case for the slaves. Some slaves had high positions in government. Some of them were teachers of children. Some were in business. And unfortunately, there were some who worked the mines, and there was as bad as our experience was. So, Paul's message to the church about slavery was this: let each of you, you ready, remain in the condition in which you were called. Here's how he counseled the Corinthian Christian slaves. Were you a slave when you were called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you can gain your freedom, make use of your present condition now more than ever. Now, I have read references to a Presbyterian minister during our slave days in America who wrote a big, thick book on why slavery was God's will for the people. I've not read the book, I've just referenced about it, but I expect he quoted this passage. Oh, those slaves, God right here in the book tells them to be enslaved. That's obviously not what Paul's getting at. What Paul was getting at is drawing a contrast. It is most important not for you to seek status, but for you to seek even the status of a free man, but for you to seek to obey the Lord. Here's how he talked to the Corinthian slaves. For whoever was called in the Lord as a slave is a freed person, belonging to the Lord, just as one was freed was called a slave of Christ. Some people today are slaves to addiction. Others are slaves to money, possessions, power, status, all of those things. Jesus wants us to know wherever we are, we can have an inner life of freedom as we live as his friends. There was a Jewish man, Viktor Frankl is his name, and during World War II, he was a Holocaust survivor, and he was in a concentration camp. Frankl went through some horrible things in that camp. One of the things he discovered, though, was no one could take from him his inner freedom. He was free because he chose to be free on the inside. Jesus Christ gives that to us. In fact, here's how Paul put it to the Corinthians. You were bought with a price. Don't become slaves of human masters. Now, we have an advantage in our life with Christ. As we live with him, he changes our inside condition, and we can be the freest, most joyful people that there are. Well, thanks a bunch for being a part today. God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow. We'll be studying Micah then.